Loving an avoidant partner without clear personal limits is like trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. No matter how much love, patience, and understanding you pour in, it will never be enough to create the emotional fullness and security that healthy relationships provide. The emotional limit, how much of yourself you can give without losing yourself. The most crucial limit to establish when loving an avoidant is your emotional limit, the maximum amount of emotional energy, patience, and accommodation you can provide before you begin to lose your sense of self and emotional well-being. This limit exists because emotional resources are finite, and consistently giving more than you receive creates a deficit that eventually leads to resentment, burnout, and loss of your authentic identity. Your emotional limit includes the maximum amount of emotional labor you can perform for someone else without neglecting your own emotional needs. This encompasses how much you can support their emotional processing, how often you can initiate relationship conversations they avoid, how frequently you can provide comfort without receiving reciprocal support, and how much you can accommodate their emotional unavailability before it begins damaging your own emotional health. Recognizing when you're approaching your emotional limit requires honest self-assessment about your current emotional state. Warning signs include feeling constantly drained after interactions with your partner, losing interest in activities that usually bring you joy, finding yourself making excuses for their behavior to friends and family, or noticing that you've stopped expressing your own needs to avoid conflict or their withdrawal. The emotional limit also encompasses how much uncertainty and inconsistency you can tolerate before it begins affecting your mental health and ability to function in other areas of your life. Loving someone whose emotional availability fluctuates unpredictably creates chronic stress that can manifest as anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, and difficulty concentrating on work, friendships, or personal goals. Your emotional limit should account for the cumulative effect of their avoidant behaviors over time. While you might be able to handle occasional emotional distance or inconsistency, the sustained pattern of avoidant behavior creates wear and tear on your emotional resources that becomes increasingly difficult to manage without clear boundaries and limits. Establishing your emotional limit also means recognizing the difference between supporting a partner through temporary difficulties and enabling chronic patterns of emotional unavailability. Supporting someone through a specific challenge or stressful period is part of healthy partnership, but accommodating ongoing patterns of emotional withdrawal that never improve despite your investment represents crossing your emotional limit. Your emotional limit should also include protection for your other relationships and life areas. When loving an avoidant partner begins to negatively impact your friendships, family relationships, work performance, or personal growth, you've exceeded your emotional limit and need to reassess whether the relationship is sustainable without significant changes. The most important aspect of your emotional limit is understanding that it's not negotiable or adjustable based on how much you love someone. Your emotional capacity is what it is, and trying to exceed it consistently will eventually lead to emotional exhaustion, resentment, and the deterioration of your own mental health and well-being. The time limit, how long you can wait for change. Every relationship with an avoidant partner needs a time limit, a clear endpoint for how long you're willing to invest in someone who may never develop the emotional capacity necessary for the kind of partnership you want and deserve. This limit protects you from spending years or decades hoping for changes that may never materialize while missing opportunities for relationships that can meet your needs. Your time limit should be based on realistic assessment of how attachment patterns change, not on romanticized notions about love conquering all obstacles. Research shows that significant changes in attachment patterns typically require years of consistent therapeutic work and personal commitment to growth. If your partner isn't actively engaged in this work, your time limit should be much shorter than if they're demonstrating genuine commitment to change. The time limit should also account for your own life goals and timeline for relationship milestones. If you want marriage, children, or other significant commitments within specific time frames, you cannot afford to spend indefinite time hoping an avoidant partner will become capable of these commitments. Your time limit must align with your personal timeline for the life you want to create. Establishing a time limit requires honest conversation with your avoidant partner about their capacity and willingness to address their emotional limitations. If they're unwilling to acknowledge that their avoidant patterns create relationship problems or refuse to commit to working on these issues, your time limit should be immediate rather than extended. Your time limit should include specific benchmarks for the kind of progress you need to see to justify continued investment in the relationship. These benchmarks might include consistent emotional availability, willingness to discuss relationship issues, participation in therapy, or demonstrated effort to meet your emotional needs. Without measurable progress toward these goals, your time limit should prompt relationship evaluation. The time limit also needs to account for the opportunity cost of continued investment in a relationship that may never fulfill your needs. Every year you spend hoping an avoidant partner will change is a year you're not available for relationships that could provide the emotional partnership you're seeking. This opportunity cost becomes more significant as you age and your options potentially become more limited. Your time limit should be communicated clearly to your partner, not as an ultimatum, but as important information about your needs and timeline. They deserve to know that your investment in the relationship isn't indefinite and that you need to see specific changes within specific time frames to continue building a future together. Most importantly, your time limit must be enforced consistently. If you establish a time frame for needed changes and those changes don't materialize, following through on your limit is essential for your own credibility and well-being. Repeatedly extending deadlines without seeing progress trains both you and your partner that your limits aren't serious. The accommodation limit, how much you can adapt without compromising your needs. Healthy relationships require some accommodation and compromise from both partners, but there's a limit to how much you can adapt to someone else's emotional limitations before you begin compromising your own fundamental needs and authentic self. Your accommodation limit defines how much you can adjust your expectations, behavior, and relationship requirements before you're no longer in a relationship that serves your well-being. Your accommodation limit includes how much you can lower your expectations for emotional intimacy, consistency, and partnership before you're essentially in a different type of relationship than what you actually want. If you want deep emotional connection, but find yourself accepting surface-level interaction, you've exceeded your accommodation limit and are settling for a relationship that doesn't align with your authentic desires. The limit also encompasses how much you can modify your communication style, emotional expression, and relationship behavior to avoid triggering your partner's avoidant responses. While some adjustment is reasonable in any relationship, consistently suppressing your natural emotional expressions or needs to manage someone else's discomfort represents excessive accommodation that prevents authentic connection. Your accommodation limit should protect your fundamental relationship values and non-negotiable needs. These might include requirements for honesty and transparency, mutual respect, reciprocal emotional investment, shared decision-making, or planning for a shared future. Accommodating beyond these fundamental requirements means accepting a relationship that violates your core values. Recognizing when you've exceeded your accommodation limit requires honest assessment of how much you've changed your behavior, expectations, and relationship requirements since beginning the relationship. If you're consistently making exceptions for treatment you wouldn't have accepted initially, you've likely crossed your accommodation limit and are enabling patterns that don't serve either of you. The accommodation limit also includes how much you can rationalize or excuse your partner's avoidant behaviors before you're living in denial about the relationship's reality. Making occasional exceptions for someone you love is normal, but consistently explaining away patterns of emotional unavailability or inconsistency represents excessive accommodation that prevents you from addressing real relationship problems. Your accommodation limit should account for the impact that excessive adaptation has on your other relationships and life areas. When you find yourself explaining or defending your partner's behavior to friends and family, or when others express concern about changes in your personality or happiness, you may have exceeded your healthy accommodation limit. The most important aspect of your accommodation limit is understanding that healthy relationships shouldn't require you to fundamentally change who you are or what you need to make them work. If loving someone requires you to become a different person with different needs and different standards, you've exceeded your accommodation limit and are in a relationship that doesn't honor your authentic self. The patience limit, when understanding becomes enabling. Patience is often considered a virtue in relationships, but there's a limit to how patient you can be with someone's emotional limitations before your patience transforms into enabling that actually prevents growth and change. Your patience limit defines when continued understanding and accommodation become counterproductive for both you and your avoidant partner. Your patience limit is reached when your understanding of their attachment issues begins to excuse behaviors that are harmful to the relationship and your emotional well-being. While it's important to understand that avoidant patterns often stem from childhood experiences and fears of vulnerability, this understanding shouldn't be used to justify ongoing behaviors that prevent healthy partnership. Recognizing your patience limit requires distinguishing between supporting someone through genuine efforts to grow and change versus enabling them to continue patterns that they're unwilling to address. If your partner acknowledges their avoidant patterns and actively works to modify them, patience may be appropriate. If they use your understanding as permission to continue avoiding emotional growth, you've exceeded your patience limit. Your patience limit also encompasses how long you can wait for someone to become ready for the kind of relationship you want without losing hope, developing resentment, or becoming emotionally detached yourself. Excessive patience can lead to your own emotional shutdown as a protective mechanism against continued disappointment and unmet needs. The limit includes how much you can tolerate promises of future change without seeing consistent evidence of actual progress. Avoidant partners often promise to work on their emotional availability or relationship skills without following through on these commitments. Your patience limit should be based on actions rather than promises or intentions. Your patience limit should also account for the impact that extended waiting has on your own emotional development and relationship skills. When you spend years being patient with someone's inability to meet your needs, you may lose touch with what healthy relationship dynamics feel like, or forget what it's like to be with someone who can reciprocate your emotional investment. The patience limit needs to include protection for your own timeline and life goals. If you're being patient while waiting for someone to become ready for commitments like marriage, children, or shared life goals, your patience must have clear boundaries that align with your own needs and timeline, rather than indefinite waiting that may prevent you from achieving your desired life. Most importantly, your patience limit should recognize when your patience is actually harming your partner by preventing them from experiencing the natural consequences of their avoidant behaviors. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is stop being patient with behaviors that aren't serving either of you and allow them to face the reality of how their emotional limitations affect relationships. The hope limit, when optimism becomes self-deception. Hope is essential for any relationship survival, but there's a limit to how much hope you can maintain for someone's potential while ignoring the reality of their current capacity and demonstrated behavior patterns. Your hope limit protects you from spending your life investing in someone's potential rather than accepting who they actually are and what they can currently provide. Your hope limit is reached when you find yourself consistently focusing on rare moments of emotional connection, while ignoring the predominant patterns of emotional distance and unavailability. While it's natural to hold on to positive experiences, using these exceptions to fuel hope for fundamental change represents excessive optimism that prevents realistic relationship assessment. The hope limit also encompasses how much you can believe in someone's ability to change without seeing consistent evidence of their commitment to personal growth and development. If your partner isn't actively working on their attachment issues through therapy, self-reflection, or other forms of personal development, your hope for change may be unrealistic and self-defeating. Recognizing when you've exceeded your hope limit requires honest assessment of whether your optimism is based on evidence or wishful thinking. If you're hoping for changes that your partner has never demonstrated ability or willingness to make, you may be living in fantasy rather than realistic hope for achievable growth. Your hope limit should account for the timeline of change versus your own needs and life goals. Even if your partner has potential for growth, the timeline for significant change in attachment patterns is often years or decades. Your hope must be balanced against your own needs for partnership within reasonable timeframes. The limit includes how much you can hope for emotional reciprocity from someone who consistently demonstrates inability or unwillingness to provide it. While people can change, basing your relationship decisions on hope for dramatic personality transformations rather than current reality represents crossing your hope limit into self-deception. Your hope limit should also protect you from the emotional toll of repeated disappointment. When you consistently hope for better treatment, more consistency, or greater emotional availability, and repeatedly experience disappointment, your hope becomes a source of ongoing emotional damage rather than positive motivation. The most important aspect of your hope limit is understanding that healthy hope is based on evidence of capacity and commitment to change, not on your desire for someone to be different than they are. Your hope should be informed by their actions, demonstrated growth, and genuine effort, rather than by your love for them or your vision of their potential. The investment limit, how much you can give without guarantee of return. Every relationship involves emotional, practical, and sometimes financial investment, but there's a limit to how much you can invest in someone who may never be able to provide reciprocal investment or appreciation for your contributions. Your investment limit protects you from depleting your resources while building someone else up at your own expense. Your investment limit encompasses the emotional energy you can expend on someone else's growth, healing, and development before you begin neglecting your own needs and development. While supporting a partner's personal growth is part of healthy relationships, consistently investing more in their development than they invest in themselves or in your growth represents excessive investment. The limit includes how much practical support you can provide, help with their goals, assistance with their responsibilities, or accommodation of their needs, without receiving reciprocal support for your own goals and needs. Healthy relationships involve mutual support and investment, rather than one-sided giving that depletes your resources. Your investment limit should account for the opportunity cost of your resources. Every dollar, hour, or unit of emotional energy you invest in someone who can't reciprocate is investment you could be making in yourself, other relationships, or partners who can appreciate and match your contributions. This opportunity cost becomes significant over time. Recognizing when you've exceeded your investment limit requires honest assessment of the balance between what you're giving and what you're receiving. If you're consistently the one initiating, planning, supporting, and accommodating while receiving minimal effort in return, you've crossed your investment limit and are in an unsustainable dynamic. Your investment limit should include protection for your own goals, dreams, and development. If investing in your avoidant partner requires you to sacrifice your own growth, opportunities, or well-being, you've exceeded healthy investment levels and are harming your own future prospects. The limit also encompasses how much you can invest in someone's potential rather than their current reality. While some investment in growth and development is normal, consistently investing based on who someone might become rather than who they currently are represents excessive speculation with your resources. Most importantly, your investment limit should be based on reciprocal appreciation and investment rather than one-sided giving. Healthy relationships involve both partners investing in each other's well-being and growth, not one person consistently giving, while the other consistently receives without equivalent contribution. The self-respect limit. When love begins to compromise your dignity. Perhaps the most important limit to maintain when loving an avoidant partner is your self-respect limit, the point beyond which continued accommodation, patience, or investment in the relationship begins to compromise your dignity and self-worth. This limit protects your fundamental sense of self while ensuring that your love doesn't become self-destructive. Your self-respect limit is crossed when you find yourself consistently making excuses for treatment that you would advise friends to leave, when you're accepting behavior that violates your stated values and standards, or when you're explaining away patterns that you know are harmful to your well-being. Self-respect requires honest acknowledgement of what you're experiencing, rather than rationalization of unacceptable treatment. The limit includes how much you can pursue someone who consistently withdraws from you before you're essentially chasing someone who doesn't want to be caught. Self-respect requires recognizing when someone's avoidance is a message about their feelings or capacity rather than a challenge for you to overcome through increased effort. Your self-respect limit encompasses how much you can minimize your own needs and desires to accommodate someone else's limitations before you're no longer living authentically or advocating for your own well-being. Healthy self-respect requires maintaining your needs as important rather than consistently sacrificing them for someone else's comfort. The limit also includes how much inconsistent treatment you can accept before it begins to erode your sense of worth and your ability to recognize healthy relationship dynamics. When you become accustomed to minimal effort and inconsistent attention, your standards may drop below what you actually deserve and need. Your self-respect limit should protect you from becoming someone you don't recognize or respect in your efforts to maintain a relationship. If loving someone requires you to become desperate, clingy, overly accommodating, or constantly anxious, you've crossed your self-respect limit and are damaging your own character. The limit includes how much of your authentic self you can suppress to avoid triggering your partner's avoidant responses before you're no longer being genuine in the relationship. Self-respect requires being able to express your natural emotions, needs, and personality, rather than constantly managing yourself to accommodate someone else's discomfort. Most importantly, your self-respect limit should ensure that your love enhances rather than diminishes your sense of worth. Healthy love should make you feel more confident, secure, and valuable, not less worthy, more anxious, or constantly questioning your own perceptions and needs. The reality limit, when hope must yield to truth. The final and perhaps most difficult limit to maintain when loving an avoidant partner is your reality limit, the point at which you must accept the truth about their current capacity and likely future rather than continuing to hope for changes that may never materialize. This limit protects you from living in denial about the relationship's actual prospects and your partner's genuine emotional availability. Your reality limit requires accepting that people's attachment patterns, while capable of change, typically require years of consistent therapeutic work and personal commitment to modify significantly. If your partner isn't engaged in this level of personal development work, the reality is that their current patterns are likely to persist indefinitely. The limit includes accepting that your love, patience, and understanding alone cannot heal someone else's attachment wounds or create emotional capacity that they haven't developed. While your support can be valuable for someone who is actively working on their emotional growth, it cannot substitute for their own commitment to change. Your reality limit encompasses accepting that some people simply aren't capable of the kind of emotional intimacy and partnership that you want and deserve, regardless of how much you love them or how much potential you see in them. This acceptance doesn't mean judging them harshly. It means accepting the truth about compatibility and emotional capacity. The limit requires acknowledging that your partner's current behavior patterns are the most reliable predictor of their future behavior, especially if they haven't demonstrated genuine commitment to change. While people can grow and develop, banking your future on hope for transformation rather than current reality represents living beyond your reality limit. Your reality limit should also include accepting that staying in a relationship that consistently fails to meet your emotional needs will likely result in increasing resentment, diminished self-worth, and missed opportunities for relationships that could provide genuine partnership. The reality is that unfulfilling relationships typically become more disappointing over time, not more satisfying. The limit encompasses accepting that you cannot love someone into emotional availability, security, or commitment. These qualities must come from their own internal development and conscious choice, not from external pressure or romantic inspiration from loving partners. Most importantly, your reality limit should help you accept that choosing to leave someone you love because they cannot meet your needs is not failure, it's wisdom. The reality is that love alone is not sufficient for healthy relationships, and recognizing this truth allows you to make decisions based on what actually works, rather than what you wish were possible. Protecting your limits, implementation strategies. Knowing your limits is only valuable if you consistently protect and enforce them. This requires developing specific strategies for recognizing when you're approaching your limits and taking action to maintain them before you cross into territory that damages your well-being or enables unhealthy relationship dynamics. Regular self-assessment is essential for monitoring your limits. This might include weekly check-ins with yourself about your emotional state, energy levels, and satisfaction with the relationship's current dynamics. Journaling can help you track patterns and notice when you're beginning to approach your limits in various areas. Creating accountability systems with trusted friends, family members, or therapists can help you maintain perspective on your limits when you're emotionally invested in hoping for change. These support systems can provide objective feedback about whether you're maintaining healthy boundaries or crossing into territory that isn't serving your well-being. Developing specific action plans for when you approach each limit helps you respond proactively rather than reactively. These plans might include taking breaks from the relationship when you reach your emotional limit, initiating serious conversations about change when you approach your time limit, or ending the relationship when you cross your self-respect limit. Most importantly, protecting your limits requires the courage to enforce them, even when it means potentially losing the relationship. Your limits exist to protect your well-being and ensure your relationships contribute positively to your life. Maintaining them honors your worth and creates the possibility for either relationship improvement or the space for healthier connections to develop.